You are listening to Key to the Bridge, brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services, where we will be sharing human stories, talking about community resources, mental health, and wellness. This is a podcast for everyone. Welcome. Well, I'm very excited to welcome everybody to this episode of Key to the Bridge, where we are going to be talking about all the things. And I have two amazing guests with me here today who are locals to Sonoma County and amazing people that I already feel attached to a little bit as we move through our community building. And so I'm really excited to be with you all here today. So I'm just going to jump right in because I'm already excited to be here talking to all of you. So I had this idea a couple weeks ago when we were sitting around actually talking with my kiddos about the diversity in our community and also holidays, all of the spring holiday celebratory stuff that's coming up around Cinco de Mayo and our local Rose Parade and then Pride and Juneteenth and 4th of July. And during those conversations, really great historical questions come up with kiddos all the time. And it got me really thinking about where we live and the work that we do. And so I wanted to have you two here with me today to kind of start thinking about how our local community is doing with our histories and our stories and our identities, how we're caring for people who are doing the work, living the lives, and, just kind of some fun dreaming, maybe thought partnering on where we think this could go or what we need to do next and what we maybe want to keep the same, like maybe what we're doing really well. And so that's what we're going to be chatting a little bit about today. And I would like to let you all introduce yourselves to this lovely podcast. You can say your name and, what kind of work you're doing in the community right now and how you're feeling about being here today or anything else you want to tell us.
Okay. You want to go first?
No, you can go first.
Okay, I like this. Michelle's going to go first. Okay,
right.
Great.
Who am I? I am Mishale Ballinger. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. I'm a granddaughter. I'm a partner. And in community, I am a resource helper and guider, and I'm a therapist and a program coordinator. And I mostly work with young people and their families. I was in a meeting yesterday where someone responded to my work in social justice by saying that they're my interests, and I do not believe that they're just interests. But I do feel like a lot of white folks get to opt in and out of justice work, and so I am a deeply committed co-conspirator who uses my life experiences of trauma and hardship to build empathy for all humans and treat and fight for rights that I would want someone to fight for when it's me or my children and if it were me or my children.
Yeah. I'm just going to agree and say.
I was like, damn.
Yeah.
Obama mic drop.
Tears already?
Here we go. Okay, we're like,
You're going to call me Mishale next, and I'm just going to fall apart. Oh, I am Mishale, but I meant Mishale Obama.
Yeah, it's right.
Wow, that was deep.
Yeah,
that was very deep.
yeah.
Mine will not be nearly as eloquent.
No,
it'll be very goofy.
It'll be exactly who you are, which
Yes,
is what
it
we
is.
want.
Yes,
which is
who
what we
am
want.
I
Yeah,
is
who
the question.
am I is the question.
My name is Rolanda Bradshaw. I am clearly a black woman, very proud black woman, who is doing work. I recently retired from Kaiser after 16 and a half years. And within the constraints of Kaiser, I didn't feel like I could do the kind of work that I really wanted to do. So I am doing my own private practice now, so more full-time. And I am getting opportunities to do so many different things. It's kind of interesting. As I was leaving, I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? What am I going to do? And as soon as you turn it over to the ancestors, it is amazing the kinds of things that can occur in your life. So I've met you. and I get an opportunity to supervision, which is something that I always wanted to do. And I'm working with the kinds of people that I really love working with. Seems like I draw a certain type of person that has a certain type of issue, which is usually kind of the issue around disenfranchisement. So I feel like I'm really helping people be seen and be heard. And I think everyone in this room has had moments where you didn't feel that way. So that's kind of my story.
Well, that's exactly why you're both here. Yeah.
Nothing about that was goofy. Wow, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I just, following that part of yourself, that intuition, saying, I'm going to do, you said retired, but then also said full-time also. I just want to acknowledge that.
I retired, but
I retired, and now I'm doing full-time work, which makes sense.
But we know full-time private practice isn't 40 hours.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? It's definitely. But and I always say this, my therapist is like one of the best. I love her to death. And she was the one that was like, Rolanda, you can't fail. And I was like, are you sure, Sonia? Like, really? She's like, no. She's like, just put it over, really call on the ancestors, which is something which I'm sure we'll get to later. That's something that I'm more attached to than I was probably in my entire life. This has been an interesting journey.
And both of you talking about your different identities and the pieces of yourselves, that's actually, I think, now when I'm processing the idea of this conversation, I think that's some of what was happening to me in talking to my babies about the history of the things that are going on, right? Is this piece around, we're very good at the branding and the shaping of the stories that we tell. And then as you get older, you start to realize more of the story and also the people that are behind that story, and think about what that was like for them, more about what that looks like. In our community, we have a history. Sonoma County is a really interesting place, and we have a lot of communities that have also come here in a lot of ways that's kind of been organized as in safety, in a kind of like a county safe harbor kind of model. That's how our history looks at it. And so it's interesting because when we were talking about Cinco de Mayo with my kids, they're like, well, how did Spanish-speaking people get here? And I was like, well, they needed jobs. So they were working in agricultural work. So they came here, talking about Pride coming, and my kids wanting to know, well, why? Why were there so many amazing queer people that felt like they had to come away from the city or wherever they were and hang out in Guerneville? Why weren't they safe in other spaces? And then good old Juneteenth rolling up, and I'm gonna be honest, as a half black person, I didn't really know a whole lot about that holiday until 10 minutes ago. I mean, I feel like that's a whole thing. And then 4th of July comes, and that's a whole thing in itself, because the flag in itself has some weird vibes right now. And so I think that the awareness of how we're doing with all of that contextually, in our big history and what's happening everywhere in the world right now, is a lot. And that speaking to ancestors is a really cool place, I think, to start, and thinking about that for yourselves. And so when you all are thinking about the history of where we are and the work that we're doing and the ancestors of who you all come from, how do you think that maybe shows up in your work, but also too, where do you see it in the communities and the populations you're serving?
Ooh,
it's all right.
That's deep, girl.
I know. I'm just going to go for it. Why not? Let's just get to it.
I think that what I've noticed, because I do work with the Black Therapy Fund, so it's interesting. I honestly feel like it's kind of an uphill battle for me in some ways in Sonoma County, because it's very interesting when I have colleagues refer people to me. The person will be like, oh, I want to work with you, but they would have seen me too on Psychology Today, and there's some reason they passed me by, but yet you're willing to work with me. So it's been really interesting. The Black Therapy Fund has allowed me to work with BIPOC folk. And then I also, a great directory is Inclusive Therapists, which Mishale, or you guys are probably familiar. I love that. And it just seems like there's a lot of people that are in need of some support, some help, but they don't even know where to start. And they are looking for someone who can understand their story, even if I haven't lived their story, because we know there's culture within culture within culture.
Right.
But just, they don't have to explain themselves. So I see that a lot. The Black Therapy Fund has allowed me to work with more diverse people than what I initially started. So I have way more diversity in my client base than I did. And, it's the funniest thing. In all the years that I worked with Kaiser, they appear pretty diverse, but I very rarely had any Black clients. It was always really interesting, especially up here.
I wonder why.
And working there, I was always the only, I was usually the only Black therapist. And that was in
I'm so sorry.
Don't be. That was the perfect time for Rolanda to say she was the only Black therapist. We're going to leave that in. And then the magic tones. Yep. Yeah, no.
That was actually Kaiser trying to shut me down.
That was Kaiser
Probably.
calling, saying, stop talking.
Still coming for you. After
Yeah,
6.5 years, it wasn't enough.
No, we're still coming for you.
Just trying to hold in that box.
Nope, that was excellent. That's the real life we need.
That's hilarious.
That's
just funny.
Better you than one of us.
It's so
That
good.
is true. Wait a minute.
No,
My
it's
phone
totally-
isn't silent.
It's okay.
In another room. I didn't trust it. I just freaked out.
It's totally fine. But no, I mean, Rolanda, that's for real. Like the idea of like being the only one.
Yeah, and I had to pause and think. I was always the only one. So, there was I think in one clinic there was one Black psychiatrist, but usually it was only me, maybe a nurse, but doing the clinical work. And this was in Southern California, which is kind of strange. In all the areas that I worked, Southern California is very diverse, especially the areas that I lived in. So it's just been a really interesting journey. And then being on my own, doing my own thing, and having to rely on, I don't know, you have to be doggedly determined. You cannot, I haven't been able to allow myself to give in or to give up or to get discouraged. So the work a lot is very interesting while you're helping. It's like a parallel process. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like you have people that are feeling disenfranchised, but then you may feel that same way. So it's really, you're like walking hand in hand with people, with folks.
Yeah.
And speaking to that, the lineage of that, of the populations that we're serving, right? Like I feel like that's something too I'm noticing. Listening to what you're saying, people coming to you and not having to explain their story is, I would say, too, at least from my ancestors, some cultural community differences, right? Like there's a definite difference when I would go to my white side of the family's community gatherings and the way you have to show up and speak and share versus when I go hang out with my family members of color, where you get to show up and explain and talk about yourself and be in a little bit of a different space, usually. And I wonder, too, about clients, thinking about what you're talking about, right? Like there is some deep-rooted, community, family differences between those two approaches.
Yeah, but see, what I bring, I told one of my friends years ago, I was like, girl, I'm going to start sister girl therapy. And
That's right.
And my friend would always say, and she's like rainbows and unicorns, and she's this lovely little white girl, and she's just like all happiness. And she would always be like, I can't wait to see that happen. And so I love Heather. Heather, you have to hear this podcast.
Shout out
I just
there,
brought
Heather.
your name out.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, this is what's interesting. I know this, and there's this whole, they used to say it's style flex, but what is it? It's called something else now. It's like code switching. Code switching.
Style flex we can bring that back.
I think that was the old.
Yeah,
that was the old term because I'm old, so I remember the old days.
That's a good. I forgot that one. Style flex is really a real thing.
So I do that, but then there's a real line that I will never cross. So what I tell people when I do consultations, I'm real clear. This is what you see is what you get. You know what I mean? I have to be authentically myself at all times. So, I'm going to always be a Black woman. I'm always going to show up that way. And whether it's being a Black woman or not, I'm a little larger than life. I'm pretty direct. I have a sense of humor.
That's right.
And, I might have to tell you what it's really about. I might have to break it down. You know, I'm all about check yourself before you wreck yourself. So that seems, no one up to this point has seemed to be repelled by that. But if they are, then they're not my people.
I'm just over here wanting you to be my therapist, actually. That's what's happening over here in my body. Got any openings? Looking for it.
But it's
Please
real.
tell me.
Yeah, it's real. It's super real.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's like why and you know, Mishale, like you even started with like thinking about your family connection. And so, like you, like, go ahead, speak, friend.
And that's complex, right? And I think one of the things, just thinking about clients that you really get to connect and have that mirroring process with, I get to work with many like young adults and late teens who are gender expansive and sexuality identity expansive. And I just think about my relationship to my ancestors is both full of empowerment and pain, you know, and pride and shame. You know, there's a lot of that. And so just thinking about the ways in which sometimes our healing is being able to call on my ancestors for the strength as women, right? The endurance and the survival and I think of coming from, you know, my Sicilian heritage and Calabrian heritage and the voice that comes with that. But also there's deep roots of internalized racism that turned into racism against anyone who wasn't white or English speaking. And also, you know, coming out and telling family members who I loved, and they might say, we don't want to hear that, or saying things like, I love you for however you are, but you can't tell anyone else. You can't bring that here, you know, those types of things. And then my mom, you know, would cheer me on no matter what I was doing, just my biggest fan. And so I'm thinking about really her lineage and those women who, long lines of abuse histories too, and continuing to love through that. And so it's complex. And I think with a lot of my clients, it's complex. Being non-binary or pansexual is an interesting thing because there's sometimes not even language that people allow, right? So to not even feel accepted by language and to sometimes feel like I'm not gay enough, I'm not straight enough, I'm not boy enough, I'm not girl enough, those types of things, you know. And so for me, that being able to support clients who are experiencing that is really a healing experience for me. Like you said, to just be able to fully see, accept, and hear a client and not like need to define it, because sometimes sexuality and gender are challenging to define with the words that we have. And so getting to just have a human connection, right? That's with unconditional regard and love and acceptance, and also to validate that our lineages are complex, our communities are complex, and the way they disempower us and empower us is complex, and it all sort of needs to be held, right? And understood, and that's hard. It's hard to, like, for me, it's been hard to find the gratitude and the strength and the compassion in some of my history, and not just hold the hurt and the trauma and the pain caused. So that has been complex, you know. There's a reason I say I am, you know, I am the daughter of, and I only state my maternal line. You know, there's something there that is a part of my story.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the stuff that I'm looking and wishing for there being more of in the way that we show up and care in our community. I think that we are in a place right now where there is still a lot of worry or not really sure like what's okay or risk taking or like an openness around all of it. And I keep wondering, right, when things are really, really in your face, challenging, and like the three of us talking like 3 or 4 years ago when we were in the throes of everything that's going on with the pandemic and shelter in place and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these things happening. And now I feel like we're in a place of like, now what? Like now what? Like if we're going to do what we are talking about doing, what does that look like? What does it feel like? How do we show up in those spaces? What are we going to do for the communities that we're serving? What are we going to do for ourselves? And that's a lot to hold. And I guess I just wish there was more joy and compassion and love in doing it instead of, oh my God, what if I offend someone and I make a mistake? Like, what if somebody hates me? What if I'm canceled? What if I'm, you know what I mean? Like, what if I am too authentic and I'm too much for somebody? Like, I mean, there's a lot of that to still sift through. And so I keep thinking about how we are showing up in showing what we want people to know, or even how we're branding the healing. Like I've noticed lately, like I've just been thinking about how with all of the things that are happening in the next couple weeks with celebrating, there's like an imaging, a branding, and organizing, a way of doing and being and feeling, and we've like structured in a lot of ways. Super interesting. Like I'm not super hot on social media, but like there's a lot of stuff around what it's supposed to look like or how it's supposed to feel or what people are sharing or how they're doing it. And I want there to be community. And then I also want people to feel like they can be who they are in that representation and not what, like there's even like a way to be Black. There's a way to be queer. There's a way to be whatever. There's a way to be, you know what I mean? Like there's, there's like even like the norms of the appropriateness of being different, right? Like, and so it's like there's even that, which is super interesting to me, right? Like, so I'm mumbling and going off on a tangent here in a second because I'm processing like what's up, because it's really, really challenging. And I think too the compiling of all of it, it's a lot of different pieces. And so the three of us are sitting in spaces where we have to pick what hats or pieces of ourselves that we're showing up with. And I wonder, like, what are some of the strengths of that? And then, like, what are some of the challenges that you all notice, like, depending on where you are and what roles you're in and how you're doing with that?
It's tiring.
Yeah, tiring. Yeah, that's. I'm gonna take a sip of. Yeah, you can.
It's fucking exhausting sometimes. Yeah,
I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee while you say that because it's true.
No, it can be really exhausting. I mean, I think it's sad the things that you have to get used to or grow accustomed to, or to, you know what it is? Acceptance. I've always said acceptance is a bitter pill. No one ever asks you to accept something that's good. They always want you to accept something that's kind of a little shitty, maybe.
It's the shitty acceptance pill.
Yeah, there you go. And
tough to swallow.
And so that's the way I feel about it. You know, it was funny when you were talking about the holidays and stuff. I was looking at something on Facebook, and it was really interesting. I can't remember what was I feel like it's like the Clinicians of Color Facebook group or whatever. And they had posted, it was a flyer, and I don't remember what state it was in, but it was announcing Juneteenth, but it had a white man and a white woman on the poster. And people were like, I'm so very, very confused. Like, what's happening? So then they go into the website and they see, well, on the website, and I did too, it's like Black folks and it's all like celebrating, Juneteenth. And then the realization is that's what you have to do to get other people outside of the community to actually, that. You have to like bait and switch. Like you can't just have like Black folks on the poster or whatever. You have to put white people on it in order for white people to then respect it or appreciate it or to celebrate it, which is like, really? Because like people, BIPOC people, queer people, whatever, different people on the marginalized people on the fringes, we're celebrating things all the time that sometimes don't have really much to, 4th of July ain't really about my people.
No, but I am about fireworks And barbecue.
Well,
Just want to be clear. When I'm out on that day, like, just want to be clear. But to your point.
Like when Erica and I talk about how we don't care about the Super Bowl, but we really like snacks.
And we also appreciated Usher this year. I'll just give a little shout out. Mishale and I had a moment. We were like, "Thank you."
We did, yeah.
We all did. Okay, but you have to pick. But to your point, Rolanda, to your point, right? How do I show up in the community that I am in and enjoy what's there? Everything might not be for me, but I can do that. That is a cultural, also social level of like knowing how to operate in the world. And if you're marginalized, you have to do that. About to pound the table and mess up the microphone. I was going to. Because that's part of my learned skill, right? As a human, that I know that things are complex and interesting and different. And I don't show up to a space and think that I own it or that I even am invited. I have to just see what's there, learn, adapt, right? Like nobody's marketing for me to show up.
But what's so interesting is, the reason I was going to slam the table is I had a friend one time. It was a psychiatrist friend and thought I knew her really well, thought we were really close. And we went to something superly benign like a comedy show in Southern California. And it was, I can't think of his name. I think he's passed since then, but it was a black comedian, like a famous one that used to write for Richard Pryor.
Oh, okay.
And I can't think of his name. He used to play Negro Damas on the Chappelle Show.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah,
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
I can't think of his name right now.
Nope.
But anyway, I believe we went to see him, and I had my friend come with me, a white woman, who I thought was, kind of hip, thought she kind of got it. And it was an audience primarily of black folks. And I kid you not, after that, she was just like, oh, maybe we can do something together again. But she didn't want to do something where there was a lot of black people. Because she felt, interestingly enough, she felt odd and not she didn't feel at ease.
And what I keep hearing is the word unsafe. I do all this interrupting racism and discrimination work where I hear particularly white women use the word unsafe.
Yeah.
And when you talked about that image, right, I'm thinking, oh, it's what makes white people feel safe is to see whiteness, right? And I also think about that when I'm in situations, right, where I feel like things are being softened. Like I'm reading a book right now where Tracy Benson talks about using the word anti-bias instead of anti-racist because it brings people in. That like when we say we're going to, work to dismantle and disrupt racism, so much of that is uncomfortable for white folks, but the work can't be done without white folks because we are centering the upholding of it. It's the system we created, right? So it's just to think about that word unsafe, to think about because we don't sit down and talk about these things together, and white people don't actually have to talk about race that much because they're centered, so their families aren't talking about it, right? And what I find so interesting when you say the word exhausted is that the work that I do at SCO with interrupting racism, Joanna Pon, I'm going to give her a shout out. She's a black woman, and I find that when those things get softened, when those conversations happen, I feel all this rage, and it's obvious that even like we were joking, I can get all angry, and her response, I admire. I'm like, oh my gosh, you stay so calm, because it's been a survival skill for her. And so I think about that. We joke about white liberal rage, but it's real. It's like the taking on the anger that isn't ours because we can, and how that shifts the story to then again center us, right? And so, you and I were in a meeting recently where there was some white woman tears as a reaction, and just all of the way in which that shifts centering. And as much as I want to trust that there's I can have compassion for people and their tears, I just think about the ways in which we're asked to soften messages to, again, center those with advantaged identities, right? And the ways that we're asked to, just like shift stories because it's not comfortable, which is then internalized as unsafe for a person with an advantaged identity, whether it's being cisgender or white or, whatever.
Yeah.
I get conflicted about that in the work, because there's this part of me that's like, no, I don't want to talk about bias. I want to talk about racism. I want to talk about homophobia and transphobia. I want to just say it exists, and we need to acknowledge that. And then there's a part of me that's like, okay, but if we don't have folks with advantaged identities come into this work, it is a lot harder, right? We need them to deconstruct their own thought process and unlearn and become co-conspirators. And by them, I mean me, because I am, but, myself, always unlearning.
And I also think there is more and more and more co-conspirators that want to get in the mix, or that have always sort of been in the mix but haven't gotten to go to the level that they want to go to in terms of co-conspirating, because they just didn't know how, or like what to do or how to do it. And I bring that up just because I think about, I've been thinking a lot about families and what families are starting to look like, and what those dynamics and pieces are going to look like, right? Like as we're moving forward and things like that. And so I'll give a personal example, Rolanda. You haven't met my babies yet, but I got 4 babies, but 2 of my babies are going to have all the privilege. They are blonde and blue-eyed.
I saw on your Facebook.
Yeah,
I was like,
they got that.
Babies.
Yeah, that's right. Little tan,
Ryan.
soft, luscious, skin. And Trevor's probably going to have like a 12-pack. I can just imagine what's going to happen to those 2 babies, right? They're going to walk in with all of it. And I'm going to have to figure out how to teach them, which I am already. I mean, they've been doing it since they were tiny, but how to be, right? Like how to be a co-conspirator. Like what does it mean to grow up in that, right? And then not saying Dominic and Mariah, the other 2 don't have any privilege, because they're also highly intelligent and beautiful, and they're all going to speak 2 languages, and they come from a bunch of privilege. What does it look like? So if you've come from those places and you want to be a co-conspirator now, what it looks like is going to start to shift and change. And how do we want to do that? Because man, that's my favorite thing is when Trevor checks someone, they'll say something in Spanish or whatever, and they don't know that he speaks Spanish, and then he speaks Spanish, and they're like, what? Or they say something, he's really into the story of Jackie Robinson. He learned about Jackie, and he came home and he's like, I don't get it. He's like, dude was really good at baseball. And people upset because he's black? They're like, he was so enraged. He was so upset. And he goes, why? And I was like, well, why do you think? And so talking about it. But lately I've been thinking about this. How are we showing up in the work, in the way that we're raising and caring and doing things for people in a way that's going to hopefully do a little bit more pre-work in how we're going to be co-conspirators or just in community with each other in a different way, and I don't know what that means, but I just keep thinking that it's here. It's not coming. It's actually here. And the biology is going to get real complex in the next 30 years. I don't know how we're going to organize ourselves. I don't know. I keep wondering. It'll be interesting to see, because words are going to be weird at that point. By the time my grandkids show up, I'm going to be like, what are we doing? Just hopefully just person. Hi.
Well, yes.
You know what I mean? You're a person.
Yeah, that
nice
would be
to
great.
Meet you.
That's
great.
the goal,
That is
right?
the goal.
That's the goal, to just be humans together.
Super. But Mishale, I think about it, to your point, how we get to be co-conspirators, or how we want to continue what this work looks like in our community here. We all have different cards we can play, and what do we want to do with those, and inviting people in is hard. So that's the other part too, where I think the trepidation around people being invited in right now is thick. I think about the amount of hesitance that there is around moving into actual change work. I keep joking that I want to move past strategic plans. If I see another strategic plan, I'm going to lose my mind.
Up in here.
Up in here.
I told you always I was
Rest in peace, DMN.
That's right. That's for real.
It always happens. It always happens.
Y'all gonna make me lose my mind. It's true. Because, you know what I mean? Like, literally, in Sonoma County in particular, since the fire, I have been, like, strategically planned to almost being, like, incapacitated by the amount of planning. I want to do, like...
You want to get to the doing.
I want to do stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and I think about that in our work. Like, so we're working with clients and communities, and I feel like they're in a similar place where people are like, now, are we going to, like...
But
do
I
the
think
thing?
some of that, and mind you, I'm not in the strategic planning world.
Yes,
like,
well,
I'm removed
well.
from that. But what I would say is a lot of that is just, I think, distraction. You know, it's just a way, it's like I think I use the words bait and switch. You know what I mean? It's like to throw people off. Because what I think oftentimes systems just want to get us exhausted so that we just fucking give up. You know, give up and give in. I'm sorry, I break it down.
No, that's right. Because if I keep you in the planning phase long enough, you're gonna stop asking questions.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just like it's people get tired. It's like, oh, then and then they just give in, and I think that's part of it, you know. And then it's like because we get exhausted, sometimes we do give in, and then we give in, and we just give up to the status quo.
I mean, yeah. Speaking of 16 and a half years at Kaiser. I wonder how many strategic plans you lived through.
Probably a lot, but I mean, I wasn't privy to them. What I was privy to was this is what you're going to do. Do this, even if you didn't really understand. You just do it, and I did it because you know that's what I did, and it paid well. I'm gonna be honest.
Because benefits
and benefits. I gave up a lot of stuff, you know, to leave, you know. So yeah. Yeah, but you had said something that made me think, you know, you were talking about co-conspirators, and you mentioned internalized racism. The old saying, skin folk ain't necessarily kinfolk. You know, we also have, I think, within and I can only speak, and I'm sure it's in all communities, but in the Black community, you have, and you see it a lot in the political arena, there's people that look like me, but they're conspiring against me, and that is disheartening. Is like not even the right word for it, but you know, like as you were talking, I had flashes of different people, you know, that are just like, I'm like, wow, really? Like, I don't, you know, I'm like, I cannot even understand, you know. So you have that, you know, and that's a whole nother element to it, because you're trying to reach across the table or whatever and find co-conspirators, but then you have people that look like yourself that are conspiring against you,
and conspiring against themselves without knowing it, which is heartbreaking. But it doesn't. But is it heartbreaking, or does it just? Because to me, it just pisses me off. Like that's where my compassion ends. Well, and especially like who are we talking about? Because where the privilege of compassion, if something doesn't directly impact me, right, is like part of potentially my advantage. Like if it's easier for me, and I think that's why I get frustrated and at myself even when trying to dismantle systems of white supremacy and all of the fragility and frustration of white people, because I do feel like it's actually my work to stay compassionate, right? And yet it can be hard, whereas it makes sense for you to be angry, right?
But I can't be.
But you're not, you can't express it.
I can't express it. And that's a whole nother thing, because when you were talking about the woman from SCO, I can't remember, what did you say her name was, the Black woman that you...
Joanna Pond.
Yeah, you said you'll be in meetings, and I thought about that. There is an internal... there's a wear and tear on your soul when you can't express your outrage. And I believe that's why some of us end up in therapy. That's why some of us are having strokes and heart attacks and all these other things, because we can't outwardly express it. Yeah. So it you know, it rips you apart, you know. So...
And thinking about in this community when we're talking about festivals and flags and Juneteenth, but yet, what is it that if you're a Sonoma County resident who is Black, you on average have 10 less years to live? Like that's the statistic in Sonoma County?
Yeah, I think and I didn't know that. I think I just heard that. So
that's okay.
I'm about ready to move.
Yeah, you're gonna move?
I'm gonna have to move because I'm sorry, that can't be me. I ain't going out like that.
But thinking
These
about
people ain't
what
gonna
you
take
just
me down.
talked about, though, right? The internalization. Like,
Please, yeah, we don't want Rolanda to move. Let's not
stay.
do that. I want
We'll do
you
the
to
work
stay.
together.
I want you to stay,
Rolanda.
please.
Mishale, help me live
for
longer.
real. But go ahead. You just said it. That came out in that was like, I don't remember what health report that was, but it was like in the newspaper though. I do remember that.
It was post-pandemic, and so I think it was 2021. But I think, just being in the trauma responsive mental health justice, that like that's why we have to move beyond performative, because what we're talking about is humanity. When a person, like you're saying, internalizes that, the soul crushing, and then it shows up in your health report and your health data, right? And then we still are blaming folks for that. And so it's just so complex and so urgent. Like, I guess I get confused at how we're still in strategic plans when, if you care about humans, like this to me is humanity work. It's just being human together. And I do think one of the things that is challenging is that we're really separate. Like, we don't have conversations, we don't have meals together in community all that often, and I think that's really problematic. I don't know how you felt, but when I lived in Southern California, I had just a much more diverse community and group of being. And in Sonoma County, I'm like, whoa, like, all my neighbors are white. Some of them are queer, but they're all white. It took me like 7 years to actually connect with folks that didn't look like me. And now my friendship group is much more diverse, but it was like I almost felt like I had to have a conscious effort to like make sure I was in different communities and spaces. And it's, talk about wine culture. I mean, there is a haves and have-nots. There is an owner and a picker situation in this community, and it keeps us separated, and it keeps us not understanding, and it keeps us kind of talking about things performatively and writing it in our strategic plan, but not really feeling the sense of urgency to move beyond what's called an interest and make it our livelihood because we love and care about each other.
I mean, I couldn't have set up a nice segue to take a little teeny tiny pause at our 45-minute period right now better than that, because you all just set up keeping things bottled in our bodies could make us die. And Mishale is reminding us that Sonoma County is actually built on the heritage of plantations. We just like to call them wineries. And I'm going to say that's a perfect place to just take a little bit of a pause and also think about, too, like, what, in the spirit of some strength and joy, a little bit around that, too, is that what do we want to do with it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do we want to do? Because that's also part of the doing, is that we got to think about, in terms of liberation, like, where does the spirit of that live and what does that look like? And also not being performative in the sense of, if we just talk about how bad it is all the time, it's going to keep people down.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Right? And so we do have to, like, speak to that as well. And so I'm going to let us take a little bit of a pause, and we'll come back for part 2 of this session. Thanks so much. You've been listening to Key to the Bridge, a podcast brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services. I'm your host, Erica Bosque. Key to the Bridge is recorded and produced by Jeff Henderson and Brian Henderson. This is a podcast for everyone.